Marriage and missions. In this series, we're going to talk with families about how they use the influence of their marriage to support the missions efforts of their local church. That's up next on this episode of the Healing Place Marriage and Family Podcast.
Welcome to the Healing Place Marriage and Family Podcast, where families are equipped to reflect God's redeeming love. And now, here's your host, Jared Lambert.
Alrighty, welcome everybody to the Healing Place Marriage and Family Podcast, where families are equipped to reflect God's redeeming love. I'm your host, Jared Lambert. Thank you for taking time joining us on this episode of the podcast. On this episode, we are continuing our marriage and mission series where we are talking with families who have used the influence of their marriage to support the missions efforts of their local church. On this episode, we have Lonnie and Jackie Bickford joining us. Lonnie, Jackie, how you guys doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Hey.
Doing great.
Awesome. Glad to have you guys. Just a little intro. This couple has a great heart for the missions field. They had a big part in preparing Brandy and I to come and transition to Honduras. We spent probably, I want to say maybe 3-4 months working with Jackie and Lonnie as we prepare to transition to the missions field. They have a unique experience as far as what they did in the past and what they're doing now as far as using their marriage to serve the missions efforts of Healing Place Church and other churches. So I've been enjoying the variety of experiences, the variety of talents, the various stories of guests that we've been having on this series. So it's good to have Lonnie and Jackie join us. All right, so to get us kicked off, why don't y'all give us a brief family introduction?
Okay. Lonnie is pointing to me. So let's see. I was on the mission field for almost 15 years. I was in Mexico for 7 years. And then I was in Southern Africa for 5 years. And in between that time, I traveled to about 10 different countries ministering to missionaries and taking teams from different churches here in the States on short-term trips. And I was a single missionary when Lonnie showed up in Swaziland. And I thought I was going to marry a missionary. I thought that's what the Lord would have for me since I was called to live cross-culturally. And here comes this businessman. And it was like the Lord tapped me on the shoulder the day I met him and was like, what, Lord? I felt like he was saying, pay attention. And I was like, what? Because Lonnie came with through Children's Cup, the ministry I was working with, which is very closely connected with Healing Place Church. And he had gone on a trip with Ben Rogers, our director, the head of Children's Cup. And Lonnie spoke at our staff meeting. And that's when I first heard about him. And he's a businessman, so I didn't think anything of it because I wasn't supposed to marry a businessman. I thought I was supposed to marry a missionary. And let's see, long story short, the Lord moved swiftly. We met in August of 2010. Our courtship was emails, phone calls, and video Skype. And then, let's see, Lonnie came back and proposed of October of 2010. And the Lord confirmed a lot of things, both externally and in both of our hearts. And we were married in January of 2011. So the Lord did indicate that I was to come back and make my home with Lonnie here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Tell us about how you guys are connected with Healing Place Church.
I've been going to Healing Place for, I guess, 20 or 21 years maybe now. And 21, I think. Come out of another local Baton Rouge church that was very, very involved in world missions. Had gone on my first trip to Guatemala when I was 23 or so, and didn't feel called to be a missionary or in ministry, but I felt very, very I'll use the word call, to support the Great Commission and the fulfillment thereof. And went probably for the next 10 or 15 years, 10 or 12 years, just working, and was a tither, giver above the tithe, always gave to missions. And then the Lord just kind of amplified that. And my businesses grew. Kind of works that way when you're faithful in the tithe.
Right.
And I started becoming more and more involved with different missions works, and was able to support different things that they had going on through HBC and my local church, and then also directly with different missionaries I had met through the years.
Right.
And for me, it's kind of why I work extra.
Yeah.
We've been very blessed. My businesses have been blessed, but being able to sow into the right fields has just been a very important part of my world. And I kind of hedged my bet by marrying a missionary that she'd let me continue to give money to missions.
Yeah, she brings some empathy and compassion for the mission, the calling of missions, doesn't she?
Yeah, she also brings a long list of missionaries who need support.
That's awesome. So you guys been married? Was it 7, 8 years?
Yeah, we just had our 7th anniversary in January.
Yeah. So January, 7 years. So Jackie, you were on the mission field, like you said. You was on the mission field before getting married. I know y'all touched on it a little bit, but let's talk more about was missions important for you guys whenever you were choosing or praying about a spouse?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. As I said before, I thought I was going to live in a foreign land the rest of my life. I was a career cross-cultural minister in career cross-cultural ministry, and I just always thought that that's where I would, like I said, I was going to remain. I didn't know if I was going to remain single the rest of my life, but I certainly did want to be married. So that was definitely a huge part. So I think it threw me for a loop when the Lord like tapped me on the shoulder, so to speak. And here was this businessman who Lonnie was very upfront, with me when we first started talking, and we knew that this was heading in a certain direction. But he said, I'm not called to live on the foreign mission field. I'm called to, as he said, I'm a giver and I support missions. And really, one of the things that interested him the most was that I have a big heart for missionary member care and healthy missionaries, um, and so that was something that really, for him, like kind of perked his ears up when he was, talking to me. But I think for me, seeing his heart, hearing his heart. I mean, clearly he loved missions. If he was on it was like a 2 to 3 week mission trip in southern Africa, and he said he went to his thoughts was he was going to go, see about doing some wells in some poor areas, and he found a wife on top of that. And actually, the week after 2 weeks after he left me, he was on his way to Peru on another mission trip to speak to Christian businessmen down in Lima. And so for me, I saw this man wasn't just saying, these weren't just words, he was actually living it out.
So in the past 7 years, how has being involved in missions and supporting missions impact your marriage?
The house we currently live in, I bought 10 years or so before I met Jackie. And as a single guy, it was a kind of crazy God deal on how this house came across my path, and how I made an offer, and how I countered and acquired the house. It's a large home, 4 bedrooms, and I was just a single guy getting a little bit past the point of having a big family. So I'm thinking, Lord, why in the world am I going to have a 4-bedroom house? Uh, I didn't realize because I would be hosting missionaries for a long time after that. Um, we, we have a lot of folks when they come through the states that Jackie has connection with, stay with us. Um, she spends a lot of time doing her missionary member care. Sometimes that folks will come here and she'll counsel, or a lot of times she's traveling to where they're at. And for us without children, um, being able to work for myself, we have a little bit of flexibility, or a good bit of flexibility with our schedule. And missions can be, very time consuming part of what we do, day in, day out.
Oh, and I just, I want to add, you know, missions was a huge part of what brought us together, clearly, because I was on the mission field. Lonnie was coming to the mission field. Um, and I mean, this is something he told me during our courtship and, in our early years of marriage. But, it was very important for him that the person he married had a heart and a vision for giving and for missions and, just kingdom, advancing the kingdom. And that, his business, the business that the Lord has blessed Lonnie to be an entrepreneur. And so it's like when, as he starts businesses or even just prayed through, when we got married, the business that he was in was not doing very well. But he knew that when it would do better, and we have seen the fruit of prayer that it has grown. He didn't want it to be a how shall we say? He wanted his wife to be on the same page as, what, we don't have to drive the best cars, we don't have to have the nicest things, because our focus and our priority is what the Lord would have us do with the resources that He's given us, and to steward what He has given us. I mean, that's really huge for us. So I would say that, as we have met throughout our marriage, the Lord has brought across our path new ministries that have been very, very dear to us. Dear, a new, people, not just missionaries going to a foreign field from the States, but national, local pastors and people from, like I'm thinking India, Israel, of course, Swaziland and South Africa. We've met people throughout these last 7 years that have been a tremendous blessing to us, and as they've shared their ministry, we've been able to impact one another and help one another. And together, I'm talking about our marriage and these people on the field come together to advance the kingdom, do
Right.
kingdom work.
Absolutely, yeah. Lonnie, well, actually, Jackie, one of you guys said it. No, Jackie said it, that Lonnie was up front, that he wasn't called, to a foreign land. Jackie, I want to get your perspective from that discussion. So you had a heart for cross-cultural missions work. You talked about all the places, the other countries you spent time. How did you receive that, and how did you process, and how did God speak to you about this shift in your ministry direction from overseas missionary to being married, and moving here to Baton Rouge after getting married?
Oh, that question is very near and dear to my heart, because it really, I wasn't going to leave the mission field for just any man, is what I tell people, because it's true. I had to know that this was the way the Lord was directing me, and when Lonnie told me that was very. I mean, that's something we really had to take a step back on and pray through. Something I certainly had to take to the Lord and say, Lord, I don't understand this, because I thought the course of my life was set, as far as staying in a foreign, like living in a foreign land. And you know, as I mentioned before, there was a lot of external and a lot of internal confirmations. But I just felt like the Lord was saying, "This is the path I have for you now." And, who are we to say, Lord, you can't change that? You called me 15 years ago, and this is what I thought this, or he'd actually called me about 20 years before that. I was a senior in high school. And, it's like we can't say to God, you can't change anything. It's, the Lord, what I've really learned these last 7 years is that it's really hit home. Let's put it this way. I've learned it, but what's hit home is that we exist for his purposes. And, I remember my missions professor, I went to a Christian liberal arts school, and you got a Bible major and with whatever degree you got. My missions professor would say, missions is not about a place, it's about people. So that is just something I've really had to embrace, like coming back, moving back to the United States. Never lived in Baton Rouge or Louisiana before. And just saying, there are people here that the Lord wants to touch and uh, to use me in their life and them in my life.
Yeah, that's one thing that's consistent with all the couples that we're talking to in this series is that, and especially Brandy and I's story, we thought we had the near and the short term and long term plans set, and then God comes and like only He can do, disrupts our plans and switches things up on us. Lonnie, Jackie had made mention that you've spoken to business leaders, you go on missions trips, and speak and encourage people, not only support them, financially, but you enjoy equipping people. So nowadays, how do you feel or what do you feel your calling is? Like to encourage other entrepreneurs, and just say we have an entrepreneur who's interested in missions listening. Give us a couple minutes on how you would encourage them and what kind of advice you'd give them as far as supporting the kingdom and the local church's missions efforts.
Yeah. Um, for me, I'm a reader, so there's been several books that really spoke to me as I was maturing as a business guy whose businesses started doing better and better, and resources started coming through the business at a greater pace and larger volumes, and had always been very, very observant in tithing and giving. For me, a lot of times the Lord would give me a formula of percentages and different ways to look at the finances, and of course the tithe. I'm a big believer in that comes right off the top, the gross, not the net, and that's not a question, and it goes to the local church. And then beyond that is where over time there was a discerning of not just haphazardly giving with a good heart, but actually trying to make sure it was the right fields that I was sowing my resources, financial resources in, and then over a different period of time, starting to talk to more business guys, do a lot of stuff local with local guys here in Baton Rouge, but teamed up with Global Advance, really cool equipping ministry that equips pastors around the world, and they do a business um, equipping for the business folk of a local church in a third world, or not necessarily third world, just a, a foreign country, and did do a trip with them in Peru where I think they had 7 of us over a 2 day deal. They had 500 attendees in Lima, Peru. We were at a really nice downtown hotel, and we had from small company guys to large corporate folks, talking about God's way of doing business. And that's something that, there's a lot of ministries in a lot of local churches, from divorced folks and widows to young couples to older people, the silvers and seniors, to drug and alcohol rehabs. But a lot of local churches have, not really known what to do with the business guy that's saved and he doesn't have some big problem in his life. And Lee Domain, a guy that was HPC for a long time, wrote a great book, Pearls of the King. And it's probably the first book that I read that just really spoke to me about handling the blessings and the resources in a different kind of way, and looking at it and looking to God for direction on that in a different way than just an extra $100 in the bucket.
Right.
It was connecting and using sometimes time, which a lot of times I would much rather write a check than give you my time.
Yeah.
Because I work a lot, and my time, it's there's not a lot of extra of that. So for seasons in encroaching on my time is a lot more of a sacrifice for me than it is to write another check for $100. And the Lord kind of walked me through a lot of that. And I've gone in seasons where I had a lot of time and was able to give and sow, and it was fun and it was good. And then there's been more recent seasons where the work has just really, really been encompassing of just everything I have. And we had missions day yesterday at Healing Place, and we were in the little booth afterwards for Jackie's trip coming up to Mozambique. And I was thinking, boy, I get to give a lot to missions, but I hadn't been able to go in quite a few years. It's just the season I'm in right now. But for a businessman or for a family, the senders are just as important as those who go. And when you really learn that, if that's your role, if that's your calling, I think there's a lot of really interesting rewards, a lot of insight and discernment the Lord will just give you when you press in to see which part of fulfilling the Great Commission you're supposed to be part of, because we're all told to go to all the parts of the world and have the gospel proclaimed. Some of us get to go and live in fun places like Honduras or India or Spain. Everybody wants to go to the Spain campus. And then some of us, get to just work a little bit of overtime and put a little bit of extra money in the collection.
Yeah.
And finding your role, it's just really important to figure out where you're supposed to be in that. But I do think every single person should go somewhere at some point and not keep putting it off next year or one day. You
Right.
need to go and see what's happening somewhere else and let the Lord touch your heart when it comes to missions.
Yeah, I remember reading Pearls of the King, Lee Domain's book, and I wasn't a businessman. I was an operator at a chemical plant. And, Brandy, she was working, and she was a CPA working, in the public world, and I just remember being encouraged by that book. Just a quick summary. Basically, he talks about how there's the kings and the priests. And the priests would be, the ministers, the pastors, and lay leaders, church staff. And then the kings are, in today's world, they're the businessmen. And I just remember, I don't know if he specifically addressed it in the book, but I remember coming across 1 Corinthians 12, where it talks about the different parts of the body of Christ and how one part, needs the other, and we don't, glorify one part over the other. And I want to say that besides, Gene and Dave Olerking with Children's Cup, Of course, their heart for Africa and their heart, for the poor, and was our first exposure to missions. That book was probably one of the earlier books that really stirred me to say, okay, as a believer, I need to be proactive with the resources that God has blessed me with. And you talked about how God blessed your businesses, and I'm in agreement. God says when we give of the first fruits and return that back to the Lord, we return that back to the local church, that He's going to bless. He's going to pour out His blessings, and it. Working at a chemical plant, getting saved, and really wanting to use our family's finances for the kingdom. Many people go through different experiences, but for us, it wasn't a blessing of finances. It was a blessing of favor and faith, because in our journey, God's always calling us to take a step of faith, but it also requires sacrifice. So, we talked about it when Brandy and I shared our story on our podcast episode. It was a sacrifice to, write that resignation letter to the chemical plant in order to go, to School of Ministry full time. It was a sacrifice for Brandy, to step down from public accounting and to go start helping, with Church United, Healing Places Prior nonprofit organization. It involved sacrifice to step down from our staff positions and to be sent here to Honduras as missionaries. So, but in the end, the sacrifice that you guys, you give the tithe, you give above and beyond. On the other side of the sacrifice, there's always that blessing, and it's for His glory. But I believe that our Heavenly Father is so kind that not only does He, receive His glory, but He blesses those who walk in obedience. So I love that book. So again, if you're an entrepreneur, and if you feel like you're being stirred to take advantage of your gifts and support, it's a great resource. Pearls of the King, Lee Domain. At the end of the podcast, we'll talk about how we can get connected with Jackie and Lonnie. If you want to talk more to Lonnie about how to be encouraged and how to be equipped to walk in that field. So I love that, man. Love your heart, Lonnie. Appreciate you. Now, Jackie, you spent time on the missions field, and like we said in the intro, Jackie spent about 3 or 4 months with Brandy and I, and just pouring into us. I was so encouraged by, how she heard from the Lord, and she challenged us in just the right ways, and going through books to help us prepare for the transition, sending us articles in order to equip us. So, Jackie, take a time and tell us about a little bit more about that work, and how would you encourage somebody who's either preparing to go on the mission field or possibly transitioning off of the missions field. So tell us a little bit more about what you do nowadays with your gifts and callings.
Well, in coming back to the States, it was probably one of the most difficult transitions for me, just trying to find my place here. When, like I said before, I never thought I would live back in the States for a long period of time. And, the Lord gave, I just want to say, the Lord gave Lonnie and I a scripture, Isaiah 43:19. And it starts by saying, "Behold, I will do a new thing. Now shall it spring forth. Shall you not know it?" And the Lord was doing a new thing in both of our hearts. And, He's so, like you said, He's so kind that He, even though we make sacrifices, like you said, Jared, He blesses us. He doesn't have to. We do sacrifice. We walk in sacrifice. At least we desire to walk in sacrifice out of love for Him. And but yet so often we just see such beautiful fruit of that. And so for me coming back, and I've learned so much from Lonnie, and I'll get to your question in a minute, but I do want to just say that, for me moving back to the States and seeing, I was always, I lived on support the whole time I was on the field, all of those years. And it was always such a blessing because it is a true partnership. There's no way I could have stayed on the field without people, their giving and their sacrifice and their involvement. And, but now being married to Lonnie has given me a whole new insight. And one of the biggest things is prayer. He is a man that prays. I've never known anyone to um, pray as specific as much as and as specifically for where to sow resources. And so I just want to say that that's been something that's really enriched me and blessed me, just to see now I get to be a part of, not that I didn't give before, but now I get to be on the giving side and the sending side. And so but it's also been a blessing as I've come back, because Lonnie would tell me, Jackie, he would give me the analogy, like a sports analogy. He's like, not every, football player can always be in the game. There's a time that they come out of the game, and then they become coaches, and all the experience that they've had, now they pour into other people. And that was really just a focus I needed to hear. That was wisdom I needed to hear. And thinking about, God does all things well. And the timing of him, having me marry, I didn't marry till I was just the month before I turned 40. And bringing me back to the States, I was in a very unique position where I could help uh, missionaries, both going, coming, and those in transition, all of that, all of the above. And like I said, it was very hard to transition back. So what I do now is, you know what, I'm available. I try to just be faithful and available and teachable
Right.
to say, Lord, where do you have, here you have me, and where do you want me to sow my, the talents you've given me. And he has been so faithful, like with you and Brandy, to and other people, whether single or married, to bring them into not just my, but our path now, Lonnie and I, so that we can be an encouragement to them. Um, what I do, I definitely have the gift of encouragement and mercy. And so I am, I counsel people. I, lay counseling, of course, pastoral. My heart's very much of a shepherd. So I meet with people either, like I said, before they leave. I help to try and get them ready as much as I can. And then coming back, debriefing them, because coming back to the States when you didn't think you were ever going to, some people, when they go, they think we're going to come for the rest of our lives. And then when God changes that, that can be very difficult to
Yeah.
walk out. And then the other thing is just people in transitions,
Yep.
however, missionaries in transition. Missionary life, as you know, Jared, as you've been learning, is real life on the
Yeah.
field, real life, real people,
Yeah.
just trying to serve the Lord, So there are real issues. And I've seen and heard many of those, and I'm not surprised by them. And so that's something I do as I meet with people. And it's such a blessing because now Lonnie brings in a whole different,
Mm-hmm.
two different minds, right? Two different hearts,
Yep.
but together as one, the Lord has used us. I'm thinking about, I'm thinking of an example of one particular couple that really struggled in their time on the field. And we were just here for them, they would call us and we would pray with them and encourage them and give them perspective, offer perspective, godly counsel. And, so that's just something that how the Lord has used our marriage
Yeah.
now to speak into and to help others in their journey.
Yeah. Alrighty, guys. Listen, that's all we have time for this episode. What I want to do is, like we always say on during this series, what we want to do is that for anybody listening, We want to allow the Holy Spirit to stir up in your heart how you can take that next step to use your gifts, your talents, according to your calling and your context, to get more involved in the kingdom business of your local church. So Lonnie and Jackie has, thankfully are willing to meet with people, whether people with a heart for missions that may want to transition to the missions field, or maybe are coming back from the missions field. Or like we said, if you're just an entrepreneur, or if you're a business person, or if you're a success, if you're successful in your career and you feel the Lord calling you to support the missions effort of your local church more, they would love to hear from you guys. So what's the best way for people to get connected to you guys if they want to talk more about what we've been talking about on this episode?
So it would be my email address, and it's Jackie Zuniga at gmail.com. JACCIZUNIGA at gmail.com. And yeah, I'm also, one thing I wanted to say, Jared, is I'm also a big cheerleader of those wanting to who have a heart to go, whether short term or long term, to the field.
Yeah.
We both are. So
Yeah. I remember Lonnie saying earlier, don't put it off. And I don't know what your experience is, but my experience is that people are always concerned about the cost of the trip. I know at Healing Place Church, one of the way we resource the people who want to go out on the missions field is we give them fundraising ideas. A lot of times it's a group, like all of the trips that Healing Place offers, they have a group leader, and they usually do a lot of fundraising as a group and individually. So just know that as a church, we resource those fundraising efforts. It's far and few between times where people can't come up with money to make the trip. We believe if you just take that step of faith and you gather with other people with a heart for that trip, as long as we make an effort and we're diligent with fundraising, we believe God's going to bless that diligence. He's going to bless that effort. So it is part of the faith walk
yes.
Hey, I want to go to Honduras. Our trips range from $1,600 to $1,800. Or I want to go to Africa. Those trips usually around the $3,500 dollar area. So, but whatever it is, just know that if you take that step of faith and you're diligent in raising funds, again, it's been my experience that especially at Healing Place Church, really in any spirit-filled, Jesus-loving church, there are people who want to help and give. There are generous people who want to support what's going on missions-wise at their local church. So don't let the finances, don't let the cost of the trip be a deterrent or a roadblock to taking that step of faith and experience what God is doing in other lands. And we appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your hearts and sharing your stories with all of our listeners. Thanks for joining us, guys.
We were glad to.
Thank you, Jared.
That'll do it for this episode. As always, we encourage you to subscribe to the Healing Place Marriage and Family Podcast on iTunes or your podcast provider. Also, if you get a chance, rate and write a review of the podcast. When you write a review, that gives us the opportunity to know how to serve you better. Alrighty, once again, we're in the series of marriage and missions on this episode. Thanks again to Jackie and Lonnie Bickford for joining us. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Healing Place Marriage and Family Podcast.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. For more information about Healing Place Church, visit us at healingplacechurch.org. For more podcast episodes, subscribe to the Healing Place Marriage and Family Podcast on iTunes or the podcast server for your device.